There are moments in life that split everything in two, before and after. For me, that moment happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March. It was raining. Not a heavy storm, just that quiet, steady rain that feels like the sky is grieving something. I remember thinking how strange that was, how the world outside matched exactly what was happening inside me. I had just found out that my husband of 11 years had been lying to me. Not about something small, not about a forgotten dinner reservation or a weekend trip he didn't mention. No. He had been lying to me about something so fundamental, so deep, that when the truth finally hit me, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood in the middle of our kitchen, holding a piece of paper, and I felt the entire ground beneath me shift. I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not the kind of woman who gives up easily. I am not the kind of woman who walks away from her life without a fight. I built that life, piece by piece, year by year, with my own hands and my own sacrifices. Every corner of that house, every dollar that went into its walls, every sleepless night I worked overtime to make sure we were secure. That was me. And Marcus knew that. He knew it, and he used it against me anyway. So sit with me for a moment. Let me take you back to where this all began. Because to understand what happened at the end, to understand why that piece of paper changed everything, you need to understand who I was before I became someone I barely recognized. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how I lost everything and then got back something so much more important than a house. I was 31 when Marcus and I got married. He was charming and funny, and he made me feel like I was the most important person in every room we walked into together. That's a powerful thing. When someone looks at you like you are the answer to every question they've ever had, you believe them. You want to believe them. We had a small wedding, nothing extravagant. Both of us were practical people, or so I thought. My parents were there. My best friend Dana stood beside me. Marcus had his brother as his best man, and his mother sat in the front row with a smile I would later learn was not warmth, but calculation. But in that moment, I saw none of that. I just saw Marcus, and I thought, this is it. This is the beginning of everything. The first few years were good, genuinely good. We rented a small apartment on the east side of the city. I was working as a project coordinator at a mid-sized construction firm. Marcus was in sales, commercial real estate, which he was genuinely talented at. He had a way with people. He could walk into a room full of strangers and walk out with 3 new business contacts and a dinner invitation. I admired that about him. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't the kind of person who lit up a room. But I was steady. I was organized. I was the kind of person who made sure the rent was paid 2 days early, who kept a spreadsheet for our monthly expenses, who put 15% of every paycheck into savings even when we were tight. Marcus used to tease me about my spreadsheets. He called me his little accountant. He said it like a compliment. I believed him. What I didn't understand then was that my steadiness wasn't something he admired. It was something he was counting on. My reliability was not endearing to him. It was useful to him. There is a very important difference between those two things, and it took me 11 years to learn it. Around year 3 of our marriage, the subject of buying a house came up. I had been saving, for 2 years at that point. We had a solid amount set aside. Not enough for a full down payment on the kind of house Marcus wanted, but enough to be a strong foundation. It was my father who made up the difference. I want you to understand who my father is. His name is George. He is a quiet man. Retired now, but for 40 years he worked as a civil engineer. He is the kind of man who never raised his voice, never made grand gestures, never asked for anything in return for the things he gave. He just loved his family the way some people breathe, without thinking about it, without stopping. When he found out Marcus and I were looking at houses, he called me on a Sunday morning. "How much do you need?" he asked. No preamble, no questions about Marcus, no concerns, no conditions. "Dad, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," he said. "I'm offering." "How much?" I told him the number. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Give me 2 weeks." 2 weeks later, he transferred every dollar of it into my account. Not our joint account, mine. I remember asking him about that at the time. Why not the joint account? He paused before answering. And then he said something I didn't fully understand until years later. "Because it's your money, Claire. You make sure it stays that way." I nodded like I understood. I didn't. I transferred it into our joint account 2 days later. We bought the house that spring. A 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street with big oak trees in the front yard and a backyard that backed up to a small creek. It was more than we needed. It was exactly what Marcus wanted. I remember the day we got the keys. Marcus held them up and grinned and said, "We made it, babe." And I smiled, and I believed him, and I had no idea what was already growing in the dark. It started small, the way betrayal almost always does. A comment here, a look there. A night when Marcus came home later than usual and gave me an explanation that was just slightly too detailed, just slightly too smooth. When someone is telling you the truth, they don't rehearse it. They just tell you. It's when the words are too perfect that you start to feel the cold draft coming through the wall. By year 7 of our marriage, I had a list in my head. I hadn't written it down. I wouldn't have let myself. Writing it down would have made it real, and I wasn't ready for it to be real. But the list was there. The unexplained weekends, the business trips that produced no stories, no funny anecdotes from dinner, none of the small color you bring back from a real trip. The new habit of taking his phone to the bathroom. The way he had started locking his laptop every time he stepped away from it, even just to get a glass of water. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that this was what happened in long marriages, that distance crept in and you had to work at closeness. I told myself a lot of things. I also started noticing something about money. Our joint savings account, which I watched carefully, had been growing more slowly than it should have. Not dramatically. Not in a way you could point to and say, "There, that's wrong." Just slightly. Just enough to make me look twice at the monthly statements. When I asked Marcus about it, he had explanations. A car repair he'd paid cash for. A gift for his mother's birthday. A work expense he was waiting to get reimbursed for. Each one plausible. Each one reasonable. Each one quietly filed away in my growing mental list. I want to tell you that I confronted him earlier. That I was braver than I was. But the truth is, I didn't want to know. I kept that list in my head because as long as it was only in my head, I could still believe in the version of my life I had built. I could still believe in Marcus. It was Dana who finally made me face it. Dana had been my best friend since we were 14. She is the opposite of me in almost every way. Loud where I am quiet, impulsive where I am careful. The kind of person who says exactly what she thinks without stopping to measure the damage. Most of the time, that drives me a little crazy. That time, it saved me. We were having lunch on a Saturday, the kind of slow lunch that stretches into the afternoon, and Dana put down her fork and looked at me very directly and said, "Claire, I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear me before you defend him." I remember going very still. She told me that she had seen Marcus 3 weeks earlier, at a restaurant on the other side of the city. Not for business. She knew because of the way he was sitting with the woman across from him, the way he leaned in when she talked, the way his hand rested on the table, close to hers. Dana had watched for 10 minutes before she left. She hadn't confronted him. She had spent 3 weeks deciding whether to tell me. I didn't cry when she told me. I think I surprised her with that. I just nodded slowly, and I said, "How long do you think it's been going on?" And Dana said quietly, "I think you already know." I didn't go home and confront Marcus that night. I went home and I waited. I watched. I started paying attention with different eyes. Not the eyes of a wife who was giving her husband the benefit of the doubt, but the eyes of someone who was finally, reluctantly, deciding to see clearly. It took me 3 weeks to find what I was looking for. He had a second email account. He hadn't even been particularly careful about it. I found it because he had logged into it on our shared home computer and forgotten to sign out. I almost closed the window without looking. I almost gave him that. But something made me stop. Her name was Renee. She was younger. Not dramatically, maybe 5 years younger than me. She worked in marketing. She had long, dark hair and the kind of smile that photographs beautifully. I know all of this because in the months they had been exchanging messages, Marcus had sent her a surprising amount of details about his life, about our life. What I found in those messages broke something in me that I am still, even now, working to repair. Not because of the romance, not because of the obvious. What broke me was something else entirely. In one of those messages, sent on a Wednesday night while I was working late, Marcus had told Renee that he had been thinking about making a clean break. He had used those exact words, a clean break. And then, in a follow-up message that made my hands go cold, he had told her that the house wouldn't be a problem, that he had done his research, that once they were ready to move, it would all be straightforward. The house wouldn't be a problem. I sat with those words for a long time. Then I closed the laptop. I went upstairs. I got into bed and I lay in the dark next to my husband, listening to him breathe. And I thought about my father's voice on the phone 9 years earlier. You make sure it stays that way. I confronted Marcus the following Sunday morning. I want you to understand something about that conversation. I had spent a week preparing for it. I had decided I was going to be calm. I was going to present what I knew clearly and without hysteria. I was going to be measured and controlled. I managed that for about 4 minutes. He denied it. Of course he did. And then, when I told him exactly what I had read, including the messages about the house, his expression changed. Not to guilt, not to remorse, to something I had never seen on his face before in 11 years. Calculation. He shifted very quickly into a different strategy. He admitted to Renee. He said it was a mistake. It was over. He had been confused. He cried. Genuinely. I think those were real tears. But even through the tears, even through the apology, I could see his mind working behind his eyes. He was doing math. Not the emotional math of a man who was sorry. The practical math of a man who was trying to figure out what I knew and what I could prove. This is our home, he said at one point, when I mentioned the messages about the house. Whatever problems we're having, this is our home. We built this together. I looked at him for a long moment, and I said very quietly, "You're right. We should figure out whose home it actually is." He didn't understand what I meant. Not yet. That week I called a lawyer. I want to be clear. I didn't go in looking for a fight. I went in looking for information. I needed to understand exactly where I stood, legally, with the house, with our finances, with everything we had built, or more accurately, everything I had built while believing we were building it together. My lawyer's name was Patricia. She was in her mid-50s, sharp, no nonsense, the kind of woman who has heard every variation of every story and filters out the emotion to get to the facts. I liked her immediately. I sat across from her and I laid out everything. The house purchase, my father's contribution, the joint account, the savings discrepancy I had noticed over the past 2 years. Patricia listened without interrupting. Then she asked for documentation. Over the next several days, I pulled together everything I could. Bank statements, the original mortgage paperwork, my father's transfer records, 3 years of our joint account statements. What Patricia found when she went through all of it was not surprising to her, but it was devastating to me. In the 2 years since I had noticed the savings account growing more slowly than it should, Marcus had transferred a total of approximately $40,000 out of accounts I considered ours into accounts that were solely his. Small transfers, never more than $2,000 at a time, always on irregular dates, never in a pattern that would trigger automatic alerts. He had been methodical about it. He had been planning this for at least 2 years. Patricia explained to me what this meant in practical terms. The transfers, combined with his messages about the house being no problem, suggested he had anticipated a divorce and had been quietly repositioning assets for some time. This was relevant to the legal proceedings. It was, depending on how you looked at it, financial misconduct. But there was another piece of this that mattered even more. When Patricia reviewed the original house purchase documents, the deed, the mortgage papers, the transfer records, she found something that Marcus had apparently overlooked in his planning. Something I had overlooked too, until she pointed it out. The money my father had given us for the down payment, the money I had transferred from my personal account into our joint account before the purchase, it had passed through my personal account first, which meant there was a clear paper trail showing that the funds originated from a direct transfer from my father, George, to me, personally. In many cases, under family law, this kind of documentation matters enormously. Patricia looked at me over the papers and said, "Do you know if your father kept records of this transfer? And was there any documentation at the time of the transfer, anything in writing, about the intent of the gift?" I thought about my father, my careful, precise, civil engineer father, who had spent 40 years producing documentation for bridges and water systems and city infrastructure. I called him that night. "Dad," I said, "do you still have the paperwork from the transfer you made to me, the one for the house?" There was a brief pause. "Of course I do," he said. "I have everything. Give me your lawyer's address. I'll mail her the originals." 3 days later, Patricia called me, and when I heard her voice, I knew something had shifted. What my father had sent was not just a bank transfer record. My father, my organized, thorough, quietly brilliant father, had done something that he had never mentioned to me, something he had apparently decided to do on his own, in his careful way, long before any of this had happened. At the time of the transfer, 9 years earlier, he had drafted a simple letter, just 1 page. It was typewritten, dated, and signed. It stated clearly that the funds he was transferring were a gift to his daughter, Claire, personally. Not to her and her spouse jointly. To her. It stated that the gift was intended to support her investment in a home, and that the funds represented her portion of a family inheritance he was distributing during his lifetime, rather than after his death. He had kept the original. He had sent Patricia a certified copy, along with the original bank transfer documentation, his personal financial records from that period, and this is the part that stopped my breath, the original deed documents from the house purchase, which Patricia had already been reviewing. Because here is what my father had done that nobody, not Marcus, not even I, had noticed until Patricia put it all together. When the house was purchased, the deed was filed in both our names. Standard practice for a married couple buying a home. Marcus's name and Claire's name, joint ownership with right of survivorship. But my father, through the attorney he had quietly hired to review the transaction at the time, something he had never told me he did, had ensured that the gift letter was filed as a recorded document with the county at the time of purchase. It was a small document, easy to miss, the kind of thing that sits in a county filing system for years without anyone looking at it. But it was there. And what it established, according to Patricia, was a documented record that a significant portion of the down payment, the portion that had come from my father, was gifted specifically and personally to me, which gave me, not Marcus, a superior claim to that portion of the property's equity. Marcus had done his research on the house, he had told Renee. He had not done it carefully enough. When Patricia laid this out for me in detail, I felt something I had not felt in weeks, something that felt like solid ground under my feet again. He thought the house was an asset he could negotiate, Patricia said. He was planning to use it as leverage, but the equity picture is more complex than he realized, and the transfer documentation and your father's gift letter are going to be very significant in any proceedings. I thought about Marcus sitting across from me in our kitchen, crying those real tears, while his mind ran the numbers behind his eyes. I thought about him telling Renee that the house wouldn't be a problem. And very quietly, I said to Patricia, "Good." Marcus did not expect me to file. I think, and I say this not with bitterness, just with the clear eyes I had finally found, He expected that the confrontation would lead to a period of difficulty, possibly counseling, possibly some negotiated arrangement, and that eventually things would settle into a shape that was workable for him. He had been underestimating me for years. The divorce filing was just the latest version of that underestimation. I filed on a Thursday morning. Marcus was served at his office. I know this because Dana texted me that afternoon. She had a colleague who worked in the same building as Marcus's firm, and this colleague happened to be walking past when the process server arrived. She said Marcus had gone very still when he was handed the papers, that the color had left his face, that he stood in the lobby for almost a full minute before he moved. I won't pretend I felt nothing when I heard that, but what I felt was not satisfaction. It was something quieter and sadder than that. It was the feeling of a decision being made final, of a chapter being closed. That evening, Marcus called me. We had been living in the same house during this period, an uncomfortable, silent arrangement that neither of us knew how to change. He called me from the living room while I was upstairs, as if calling was easier than walking up the stairs and knocking on a door. "Claire," he said, "we should talk about this before it goes any further." "We can talk through the lawyers," I said. A pause. Then, "I don't think you understand what you're doing." And I said very calmly, "I understand exactly what I'm doing, Marcus." He moved out the following weekend. He took his clothes, some personal items, a few things from the kitchen. He left his key on the counter. He did not take the key I hadn't told him had already been rescheduled to change the locks. The lock change happened the Monday after he left. I stood in the new quiet of the house and turned the new key in the new lock, and I let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like months. The legal process began in earnest after that. Marcus had hired a lawyer, a man named Bradley, who had the specific kind of polished aggression of someone accustomed to fighting over assets in high-conflict divorces. He came in with the expected opening position, that the house was marital property, that all joint assets should be split 50-50, that any prior gifts should be considered absorbed into the marital estate at the time of the joint purchase. It was a standard position. It was the position Marcus had apparently been counting on. Patricia's response was methodical and precise. She laid out the gift letter, the recorded document, the original transfer records, and the financial misconduct evidence, the $40,000 in transferred funds, piece by piece. Not dramatically, just clearly. Bradley's confidence shifted noticeably over the course of that first session. Marcus, sitting across the conference table in a suit that still looked expensive, watched it happen. And for the first time since I had confronted him, the calculation behind his eyes was replaced by something that looked a lot like fear. Here's what nobody tells you about going through something like this. They tell you about the big moments, the confrontation, the filing, the courtroom. They don't tell you about the waiting, the weeks between the filings and the hearings, the days when your phone is quiet and you don't know what is happening or when something will happen. The evenings when you sit in a house that used to feel like home and now feels like evidence. I went through all of that. And I also went through something else, something I hadn't expected. I went through a quiet, steady process of rebuilding. I started with small things. I repainted the bedroom, not dramatically, just a different shade of white. Warmer. I bought new bedding. I rearranged the furniture in the living room so that nothing sat where it had sat when Marcus and I chose it together. I had dinners with Dana, long, slow dinners, where we talked about everything except the divorce, and then when I needed to, everything about it. I called my father more often. He never asked for updates on the legal situation. He trusted Patricia, and he trusted me. We talked about other things. His garden, which he had expanded into a project of some complexity. My work, which had become, in the absence of the enormous emotional weight of the marriage, something I was actually enjoying again. One evening, about 6 weeks into the process, my father said something that I wrote down afterward because I didn't want to lose it. He said, "You know what I've always thought about you, Claire? You're not someone who needs rescuing. You're someone who needs the right information at the right time, and then you take care of everything yourself." I thought about the letter he had written 9 years ago. "Dad," I said, "did you always know it might come to this?" Another pause, the long, considered kind. "I hoped it wouldn't," he said. "But I believed in being prepared. I've always believed in being prepared." I understood him completely in that moment. He hadn't done what he did out of distrust of Marcus specifically. He had done it out of love for me specifically. He had looked at the situation years ago with his engineer's eyes, practical, structural, long-term, and he had made sure that the foundation was solid. That whatever happened on top of it, the foundation would hold. I think about that a lot, about what it means to love someone in a practical way. Not just the feeling, but the action. Not just the warmth, but the structure underneath it. My father had given me a house, but more than that, he had given me protection I didn't know I needed. And that protection, it turned out, was everything. The mediation session happened on a gray October morning. I want to tell you it was dramatic. That there was a moment of revelation in a crowded courtroom, a judge banging a gavel, a gallery of shocked onlookers. That isn't exactly how it happened. Actual legal proceedings are quieter than the stories we tell about them. They happen in conference rooms with bad lighting and paper cups of coffee and long silences while lawyers review documents. But there was a moment, and it mattered. Marcus and Bradley came in confident. Or Marcus performed confidence in that way he had always performed things. Smoothly, with just enough warmth at the edges to make it seem natural. He nodded at me across the table. A civilized nod. The nod of a man who believed he was about to execute a plan he had been working on for 2 years. Patricia placed the documents on the table in a neat stack. Bradley's opening argument was what we had expected. Marital property, equal division, standard language, delivered smoothly. He barely referenced the house directly at first. He was leading into it, circling toward the moment when he would make the case that the down payment gift had been absorbed into the joint marital estate. Patricia let him finish. Then she placed the first document in front of both lawyers. My father's letter. The original, dated 9 years ago, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges, the type neat and precise. A civil engineer's letter, structured, clear, unambiguous. Bradley picked it up. He read it. He put it down. He read it again. Then Patricia placed the second document. The county filing record, showing the letter had been recorded at the time of the property purchase. And then the third, the financial records showing the $40,000 in transfers Marcus had made from joint accounts to his personal accounts over 2 years. The room was quiet for a long time. Marcus, I should tell you, was not looking at the documents. He was looking at me. And I met his gaze and I held it, and I did not look away. I wanted him to see that I was steady, that I was not angry, not triumphant, not devastated, that I was simply, finally, clear. Bradley asked for a short break. When they came back, the energy in the room had changed entirely. The negotiation that followed took the rest of that day. It was not a spectacular collapse. It was a gradual, practical restructuring of every position Marcus had come in holding. The house equity argument dissolved in the face of the documented gift. The financial misconduct evidence made an equal split of remaining assets position untenable. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, we had the outline of an agreement. I would keep the house. Marcus would repay, from his personal assets, a sum that accounted for the improperly transferred funds. The rest was divided practically and without drama. Patricia drove me home that evening. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. When she stopped in front of the house, she looked at it for a moment, and then she looked at me. "Your father is a very smart man," she said. "Yes," I said. "He is." Here's what I want to tell you about the months after. People always want to know about the victory. The moment the gavel fell, or the papers were signed, or the ex-husband was told no. And yes, that moment mattered. I am not going to pretend it didn't. But what mattered more was the morning about 3 weeks after the agreement was finalized, when I woke up in my house, and the first thing I felt was not relief or triumph. It was just peace. Plain, quiet, ordinary peace. The kind you don't notice when you have it, and desperately miss when you don't. I had coffee on the back porch that morning, looking out at the yard that backed up to the creek. The oak trees in the front were losing their leaves, covering the lawn in a deep amber carpet. I had a cup in both hands and I was in no hurry to be anywhere. I thought about the version of me who had stood in this kitchen a year earlier, holding a piece of paper in the rain-colored quiet, feeling the ground shift. I thought about the list I had kept in my head for years, refusing to write it down, refusing to make it real. I thought about my father's voice. You make sure it stays that way. And I thought about something I had read once, that the opposite of love is not hate, that the opposite of love is indifference. And I checked, very carefully, what I felt when I thought about Marcus. Not anger, not sadness, not the hollow ache of what I thought we were, just a kind of clear-eyed acknowledgement that it had happened, that it was over, that I was still here. I found out later, through people who knew people, that Marcus and Renee had lasted about 4 months after the divorce was finalized. I don't know the details and I didn't ask for them. That isn't my story. What I know is my own. I threw a small dinner party in the house that winter. Just 6 people. Dana, my colleague from work, 2 neighbors I had gotten to know properly for the first time in all the years I had lived on that street, and my parents. My father arrived with a bottle of wine in his usual quiet manner, and after dinner, when the others were in the living room and we were both in the kitchen with the dishes, he looked around at the house, and he looked at me, and he smiled. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I hugged him, there in the kitchen with the sounds of my friends in the other room, and I thought about all the years I had not fully understood what he had done for me. About the letter he had written and filed and kept records of without ever mentioning it. About the way he had loved me, practically, structurally, with foundation and documentation and the long view. "Thank you, Dad," I said, and he patted my back and said, "That's what fathers are for." I want to be careful here, because the easy thing, the satisfying thing, would be to tell you a story with a clean moral. The cheating husband lost. The loyal wife won. Justice was served. And yes, in many ways, that is what happened. But life is not a simple story, and I would be doing you a disservice if I reduced it to one. What I actually learned was more complicated and more useful than cheaters lose. I learned about the difference between love as a feeling and love as an action. My father never gave me speeches about how much he cared. He didn't need to. His care was expressed in practical, structural, concrete ways, in a letter he wrote and filed and kept for 9 years just in case. In a phone call on a Sunday morning, "How much do you need?" In the kind of love that doesn't just warm you, but actually protects you. I want to love people that way. I am working on it. I learned about the cost of willful blindness. I kept that list in my head for years, because seeing it written down would have made it real. That cost me. It cost me years of slow erosion, years of quiet betrayal that could have been addressed or ended much sooner. Seeing clearly, even when it hurts, is always better than the alternative. I learned that preparation is not pessimism. My father didn't write that letter because he wanted my marriage to fail. He wrote it because he understood that life is uncertain, that people change, that the most loving thing you can sometimes do is build the foundation before the storm comes. Preparing for difficult possibilities is not a failure of hope. It is a form of love. And I learned something about myself. I learned that the steadiness I had always thought of as just a personality trait, my spreadsheets, my careful savings, my habit of documenting everything, was actually a strength. Marcus had seen it as useful. What he missed was that it was mine. My steadiness, my practicality, my willingness to do the quiet work. Those things belong to me. They always did. The house belongs to me. And much more importantly, so does everything I built with it. It's been 2 years now. The oak trees in the front yard are extraordinary in the fall. I watch them every year with a specific kind of attention. The way the light comes through the leaves in early October, gold and amber, and the particular red that shows up just before the end. It lasts about 2 weeks. I never miss it. I have made the house mine in ways that matter. Not dramatically, not with grand renovations or an Instagram-worthy transformation. Just with small choices over time that reflect who I actually am rather than who I thought I was supposed to be when I was 27 and in love and certain about everything. My office is a room I have filled with things that I love: photographs, plants, books that I actually read rather than books that look good on a shelf. The backyard has a garden that I started last summer, badly, because I have no natural skill with growing things. But it exists, and a few things in it are surviving, and I find that enormously satisfying. Dana comes over most Friday evenings. We sit on the back porch when the weather permits, which in this part of the country is about half the year, and we talk and laugh and sometimes sit in comfortable silence and watch the light change over the creek. My parents visit in spring and fall. My father walks around the yard and makes assessments about the soil and the drainage and the structural integrity of the fence with the same precision he brings to everything. And my mother makes sure the kitchen is stocked with things I won't buy for myself. And I sit in the middle of all of it and feel something I can only call gratitude. Not gratitude for the way things turned out, though I am grateful for that too. Gratitude for the people who were with me. For Dana, who told me the truth even when it was hard. For Patricia, who turned documents into protection. For my father, who had loved me with a letter filed in a county records office 9 years before I needed it. What happened to Marcus is not really the point of this story. He is living his life, somewhere, in whatever shape it has taken. I genuinely wish him no harm. I have nothing invested in his unhappiness. I have everything invested in my own peace. And that peace, this life I am building, slowly and carefully, and with a lot of spreadsheets, is something nobody can take from me, because I understand now what it is actually made of. It is made of truth, of clear eyes, of people who love you structurally, foundationally, with documentation and preparation, and a letter that sits in a county file for 9 years, waiting to be needed. It is made of knowing what is yours and being willing to stand for it. If you are listening to this, wherever you are, in whatever moment of your life, I want to say one thing. The ground will shift. Sometimes it shifts when you are not ready, when you are standing in the rain in your own kitchen holding a piece of paper, when everything you thought was solid turns out to have been built on something other than what you believed. When that happens, see clearly. Find people who tell you the truth. Look at the documents. Know what is yours. And trust that what is really yours, truly, foundationally yours, has a way of coming back to you. It always does.